1 hour before I was supposed to give my brother my bone marrow. He told me. The thought of having something from an ugly woman inside him made his skin crawl. Then my parents agreed with him. They thought I would still lie down, let the doctors cut into me, and save the son who had just said he hated me. Instead, I pulled off my hospital gown and reached for the donation consent form. My mother grabbed my arm. "What are you doing? The doctors will be here any minute." "Let go, I said, "or I'll call security." My father stared at me with open disgust. "Stop making a scene, Nora. Your brother was joking." Henry's voice came through the phone again, casual and cruel. I said, "I'm grateful, but donating is her duty, isn't it? She's my sister." My mother sighed, as if I were exhausting her. "He isn't wrong. And you've never been pretty like Talia." Talia, my cousin, the girl my family had chosen over me since childhood. The same girl who had wrapped her arms around my fiancé at our engagement party and kissed him in front of everyone. I had ended the engagement on the spot. My parents hadn't blamed him for cheating. They blamed me for embarrassing Talia. My father even said she had saved me from marrying a bad man, so I should thank her. Now, they expected me to risk my life for Henry, while all 4 of them punished me for refusing to smile at the woman who had taken my fiancé. The hospital door opened. Talia stepped inside carrying a delicate gift bag. Her face was arranged into perfect concern. "I came to see Henry," she said softly. Then she held the bag out to me. "And I brought you wedding favors. I'm getting married this weekend. Uncle said you'd still be recovering, so we didn't send you an invitation." Before I could answer, Henry burst out of the isolation ward, despite the nurses shouting after him. "Talia, I knew you'd come." My parents' faces softened instantly. They crowded around her while I stood beside the bed, prepared for a surgery that would save their son. Talia glanced at me and smiled. Henry moved between us, as if I might attack her. "Why are you looking at her like that? You're an ugly, vicious witch. No wonder no one wants you." Then he looked me up and down. "Honestly, the thought of your marrow inside me makes me sick." I stared at him. Since his leukemia diagnosis, I had stayed at the hospital day and night. I had researched every food he could eat, washed his clothes separately, booked a recovery trip to Sweden, and signed the donation papers. The moment doctors confirmed I was a perfect match. He knew all of that. He also knew Talia was a match. But Talia had a wedding to attend, a career to protect, and a life everyone considered too valuable to interrupt. Mine was apparently disposable. I turned to my mother, still foolish enough to hope she would defend me. She stepped closer and straightened my collar. For 1 second, the warmth of her hand almost broke me. Then she said, "You have always been such a disappointment. Look at Talia. She's busy, yet she rushed here as soon as she heard about Henry. And you're about to ruin his operation, because you can't control your jealousy." Her voice softened into something worse than anger. "This is why everyone loves her, Nora. And why no one loves you." Something inside me went quiet. I picked up the consent form and tore it straight down the middle. My mother lunged for the pieces. Henry shouted. I slapped him before he could finish. My father hit me so hard, I stumbled backward and crashed to the floor. More blows followed. I curled around my head while he called me ungrateful, vicious, and worthless. When he finally stopped, he stood over me panting, "Get out. You are no daughter of mine. We don't need you. Someone else can donate to Henry." I tasted blood and felt something close to peace. I had spent my whole life trying to earn a place in this family. My father had just released me from that impossible job. I pulled myself upright using the bed rail. My mother changed tactics immediately. "Families say things they don't mean. Are you really going to abandon your brother?" She offered to kneel. She promised to apologize on everyone's behalf. Talia took my hand and asked whether I could bear to watch Henry die. I looked at her. "He still has you. You're a match, too, remember?" The room fell silent after Talia's father died. Mine brought her into our home. My parents placed every good meal in front of her, bought her the clothes I wanted, and praised her while calling me thin, dull, and embarrassing. I fought for years. I studied harder, worked longer, and gave them money, gifts, and obedience. I thought success could make me worthy of the affection they gave her. Freely. When Henry got sick, I volunteered before anyone asked. None of it changed my place. The unloved child could empty herself into a family and still be accused of giving too little. I should have understood that years earlier, when my only comfort in the house was my dog, Daisy. I used to hold her at night because she was the only living thing. That never made me compete with Talia. When my family noticed, my father accused me of caring more about an animal than my own blood. He threw a knife onto the balcony, locked Daisy and me outside, and said I could come back in after I killed her. Then my parents, Talia and Henry, left for a week-long vacation. It was the hottest part of summer. For 7 days, I survived on dog food and rainwater, while pounding on the glass until my hands bled. Daisy did not survive the heat. When my family returned, no one asked how I had stayed alive. My mother looked at Daisy's body and asked whether I was finally finished with my nonsense. That was the day I stopped begging to be included. Yet even after that, I still kept serving them. I kept paying bills, bringing gifts, and mistaking usefulness for love. Standing in the hospital, I finally saw the pattern. Clearly, they did not love me when I obeyed. They simply enjoyed what obedience gave them. I picked up the duffel bag beside the bed. It held steamed fruit, clean clothes, medicine, organizers, and the plane ticket I had bought for Henry's recovery. I explained each item, while my family watched with the same arrogant certainty. Nora would complain, cry, and then surrender like always. I dropped the bag into the trash and tore the plane ticket in half. Henry reached for it. That was mine. Asked Talia to replace it. His face twisted. Walk out that door, and Mom and Dad will never forgive you. That's the first good thing you've promised me. Talia stepped closer, eyes red but dry. She offered to leave the family and give me everything they bought her. It was the same performance she had used for years. When I pulled my hand away, she staggered into a thermos. Hot water splashed across her arm. Henry punched me before I understood what had happened. My father locked my arm behind me. My mother seized my hair. They dragged me away from the hallway and beat me, while Talia cried that they should stop. Without making any real attempt to stop them, I managed to dial 911 and shout the hospital's name. Henry smashed my phone beneath his shoe. When the police arrived, I was bleeding on the floor. My mother pointed at me first. Arrest her. She backed out of a bone marrow donation and attacked us. She held up Talia's burned arm as proof. The officer looked from Talia's reddened skin to my split lip, swollen face, and torn clothes.
This is assault, he said.
All of you are coming to the station. For the first time, strangers saw what my family had spent years calling discipline. The officer saw my injuries and the fragments of my phone beneath Henry's shoe. That did not soften my parents. It only made them angrier. That outsiders were treating their violence as a crime. My father immediately denied that Talia had touched me, not because it was true, but because she planned to apply for a government job, and a record could ruin her future. Even now, he was protecting her. He did not ask whether my injuries would affect my work, my health, or the donation he still expected me to make. My future mattered only when it could shield Talia's. Henry stood beside him, complaining that the police were delaying his treatment, as though the violence had happened to him. The officers separated us and explained that family did not have a legal exemption for assault. Watching my parents realize that discipline would no longer end, the conversation gave me more strength than their apology ever could. He transferred $10,000 to my account and told me to withdraw the complaint. I accepted the money. Relief flickered across their faces. They thought they had purchased my silence and restored the old order. Then I looked my father in the eye. Money won't fix this. His expression hardened. What else do you want? I gathered the torn donation papers and placed them in my bag as evidence. I'm going to the records department. My mother stopped breathing. Henry's face finally lost its contempt. I opened the door and delivered the one consequence. None of them had believed I was capable of choosing. Nora Harris, and formally cutting every legal and family tie between us. The floor tiles of St. Jude's Memorial were slick with disinfectant and the smear of my own blood. When I walked away from room 412, I didn't run. Running gives people the impression that they can chase you, that there is still a game of pursuit to be played. I walked with the deliberate, heavy cadence of someone who had just survived a building collapse and was checking to make sure their spine was still intact. Behind me, the corridor erupted. My father's voice carried over the rhythmic hum of the ventilation shafts, a rasping, authoritarian bark that had governed my childhood. Nora, you step into that elevator and you're dead to this family. I died 7 years ago on the balcony with Daisy, I muttered under my breath. You're just finally smelling the rot. Officer Kowalski, the younger of the two patrolmen who had responded to my 911 dispatch, stayed 2 paces behind me. He wasn't guarding me from an arrest, he was keeping a physical barrier between my mother's grasping fingers and my lacerated shoulder. Ma'am, Kowalski said, his tone low and professionally neutral, though his eyes kept darting to the crimson pooling at the corner of my jaw. We need you to clear an intake exam in the ER before we transport you to the precinct for the formal report. You have visible contusions and that lip is going to need 3 or 4 sutures. First, the records department, I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, raspy, wet, but devoid of the tremor that usually defined my interactions with my father. Then legal affairs. If I don't file the medical revocation within the hour, their attorney will claim I was incapacitated by shock and enforce the power of attorney my parents had me sign when Henry was first admitted. Kowalski glanced back at the older officer, Sergeant Miller, who was currently wrestling my father against the nursing station counter as Thomas Harris attempted to lunge past them. She's within her rights, Miller called out over the commotion. Get the paperwork stamped. I'll hold the family here for transport. The hospital's administrative basement smelled like old toner and damp concrete. The clerk on duty, a middle-aged woman named Mrs. Gable, whose spectacles hung from a beaded chain, looked up with mild irritation until she saw the blood dripping from my collarbone onto the linoleum. I need Form 88B, I said, placing the 2 halves of the donor consent form on the glass counter. Revocation of anatomical gift, withdrawal of next of kin, medical access, and immediate cancellation of medical proxy for patient Henry Harris, MRN 409 to 112. Mrs. Gable's hands froze over her keyboard. Honey, the transplant team is prepped on 5. The surgical slate has this down as a directed harvest. The directed donor is withdrawing consent, I said evenly. Under Section 12 of the Uniform Anatomical Gift Act, consent may be revoked at any time prior to the incision, verbally or in writing. I am doing both. Timestamp it. She looked into my eyes, then at the bruised imprint of my father's knuckles, blooming along my zygomatic arch. Without another word, her fingers flew across the mechanical keys. The printer behind her word to life, spitting out 3 copies on canary yellow carbon paper. Sign here, she whispered, her voice dropping into conspiratorial sympathy. And here. Do you want me to lock the file so no one with proxy credentials can view your contact information?
Seal it, I said.
If anyone named Thomas, Eleanor, or Henry Harris requests so much as my blood type, call hospital security and the county sheriff. I took the yellow receipt. As I pressed my signature into the bottom line, the pen dug through the paper, tearing the margin. My hands weren't shaking from fear. They were shaking from the sheer, terrifying rush of oxygen-filling lungs that had spent 26 years holding their breath. When we came back up to the ER trauma bay, the scene had escalated. My father was seated on a plastic waiting chair, handcuffed to the armrest. His bespoke Italian wool jacket was rumpled, his silk tie crooked. He was 54, a senior partner at a mid-tier commercial real estate firm, a man whose entire social currency was built on golf club handshakes and the reputation of being a benevolent patriarch. Being cuffed in a public hallway by a 24-year-old patrolman was a humiliation he was processing as a personal war crime. My mother, Eleanor, sat 2 chairs away, dabbing at Talia's arm with a sterile saline wipe she had stolen from a supply cart. Talia was weeping, the quiet, photogenic kind of weeping that made bystanders want to offer coats and hot tea. A superficial patch of erythema the size of a silver dollar marked her forearm, where the tepid water from the thermos had spilled. Nora, Eleanor hissed as I walked past toward the suture tray. She didn't look at the gauze taped to my ribs or the swelling that had already closed my left eye halfway. Look at what you've done. Look at your cousin. She has a commercial shoot on Thursday for the state tourism campaign. If it scars, she can cover it with the foundation she bought with my credit card, I said, sitting on the examination table. Dr. Chun, the ER resident on duty, pulled the curtain shut, slicing my family out of view. Lie back, he instructed, his voice tight with controlled anger. Who did this to your face? My father, I said clearly, loud enough to penetrate the polyester curtain. Thomas Harris, with an assist from my brother, Henry Harris, who pinned my arms against the isolation barrier while my mother held my hair. Liar. Henry's voice screamed from the far corridor. He had evidently refused to stay in his isolation unit, dragging his four-pole along like a weapon.
She
attacked Talia. She's mentally unstable. She's trying to murder me by withholding treatment. Dr. Chin didn't look up from his tray. He loaded a syringe with lidocaine.
The
needle will sting, he said quietly. Then louder. Officer, get that patient back to his ward before he contaminates this entire bay. He has an absolute neutrophil count under 500. If he catches a cold out here, he's dead in 48 hours anyway. I felt the cold bite of the anesthetic entering my lower lip. The pain was sharp, local, and honest. It didn't pretend to be love. It didn't ask for gratitude. It was just tissue and nerve endings repairing what violence had dismantled. While Dr. Chen stitched the split, Kowalski stood by the curtain, his body worn, a camera blinking with a steady green light. "The $10,000 your father wired you," Kowalski said, glancing up from his notebook. He claimed to the sergeant that it was a reimbursement for travel expenses and that you accepted it as a settlement. "Check the memo line on the bank alert," I replied, speaking through the half-numbed right side of my mouth. He typed drop charges and dear duty. In this state, that meets the statutory definition of witness tampering under Penal Code 410. I haven't touched the funds. I want them logged as Exhibit B in the felony assault filing. Outside the curtain, the sound of my mother's voice hitched, a sudden, sharp gasp of realization. For 26 years, they had operated under the premise that Nora was soft. Nora was the packhorse. Nora was the girl who, when locked on a balcony for 7 days to starve alongside her dying golden retriever, had still come back inside and washed their dinner dishes because she thought cleanliness might buy clemency. They had forgotten that a dog backed into a corner will eventually stop barking and simply use its teeth. I did not go back to the family house on Elmwood Terrace. I didn't even go back to the 2-bedroom apartment near the financial district where I had let Talia live rent-free for 14 months under the pretense that she was saving for her wedding. At 4 a.m., discharged from the hospital with a prescription for antibiotics, 4 stitches in my lip, and a cracked 7th rib taped securely, I checked into a generic business hotel 3 miles from the courthouse. I bought a cheap burner phone from the 24-hour gas station across the street and booted up my laptop using a tethered VPN connection. The first thing I did was open my banking portals. My family's entire economic ecosystem was an intricate web of parasitism, constructed on the assumption that my high-earning career as a senior logistics analyst was merely a communal asset pool for the Harris family. I opened the master checking account. Over 5 years, I had allowed my father to be a secondary authorized user on my corporate disbursement account so he could manage the tax liability. In reality, he had been skimming $3,200 every month to pay the lease on Henry's BMW M3 and Talia's bridal alterations.
Click.
Access revoked. Secondary card cancelled. Next was the lease for apartment 4B on Crescent Street, the apartment where Talia had spent the last year hosting bridal brunches and storing her $4,000 imported Scandinavian dining set. The lease was in my name, alone. I had signed it when Talia claimed her credit score had been ruined by an administrative error. I logged into the tenant portal, selected early lease termination under domestic violence exemption, and uploaded the certified copy of the police report Sergeant Miller had handed me at the precinct. Notice to vacate, 72 hours. Then came the utilities: water, electricity, high-speed fiber internet, the family health insurance umbrella policy that I had paid out of pocket since Henry's initial diagnosis 18 months ago, all severed with a sequence of keystrokes that felt lighter than air. At 6:30 a.m., my burner phone began to vibrate against the Formica desk.
It was an
unrecognized number, but the area code was local. "Speak," I said. "Nora?" It was Julian. My former fiancé's voice had that distinct, smooth resonance that had once made me feel safe during late-night study sessions in college. Now it sounded like oil running over wet gravel. "Julian," I said, "you're calling early. Doesn't Talia need her beauty sleep before your final cake tasting?" There was a heavy pause on the line. I could hear the hum of an espresso machine. In the background, my espresso machine, the $3,000 Italian unit I had bought for our anniversary and left at the apartment when I caught them together. "Look, Nora," Julian began, adopting the measured, patronizing tone he used when negotiating commercial leases. "Your father called me from the holding cell. What you did at the hospital, it's completely unhinged. Henry is in crisis. The doctors had to postpone the entire conditioning chemotherapy protocol because the donor slot was vacated. Do you have any idea what that does to his survival odds? Statistically, it lowers his 2-year remission probability from 72% to 28%. I replied smoothly. "I know the data, Julian. I spent 4 months reading the oncology journals while you were taking Talia to weekend retreats in the Berkshires. Then how can you be so callous? He snapped, his facade of patience slipping. He's 22 years old.
He said some stupid things.
He's terrified.
When
People are facing mortality, they lash out. You're his older sister.
you're
Supposed to absorb that, not weaponize it to settle petty childhood grudges. Did you call for a specific reason, Julian, or are you just auditioning for the role of grieving brother-in-law? Talia is traumatized, Julian said, lowering his voice into a righteous hiss. She spent all night crying. Her arm has second-degree blisters. She was trying to bring peace to this family, Nora. She brought you wedding favors out of the goodness of her heart, and you shoved boiling water onto her, and then let the cops drag your own father away in irons. What is wrong with you? Talia is a HLA 10-10 match, I said quietly. Silence fell over the line. What did you say?
Julian asked.
Talia was tested 3 weeks after Henry's diagnosis, I said, leaning back against the cheap headboard of the hotel bed, watching the sunrise paint the industrial park outside in shades of bruised orange. The results came back from the regional marrow registry on October 14th. She is a 6-antigen, high-resolution match, identical compatibility to mine. She said she was incompatible. She said her blood panels showed an autoimmune marker that disqualified her.
She lied, Julian.
She didn't want to undergo the 4 days of filgrastim injections because the bone pain would make her miss her bachelorette party in
Cabo.
And she didn't want the pelvic harvest scars because her wedding gown has an illusion lace back. I paused, letting the silence fester between us. Ask her yourself, I whispered. Ask her to pull up her portal on the National Marrow Donor Program Registry. Ask her why, if she loves Henry so much, she let me carry the physical burden while she picked out calla lilies for your centerpieces. Nora, that's absurd. Talia wouldn't. Julian.
What?
The locksmith is scheduled for 8 a.m. at the Crescent Street apartment.
The
building management has orders to dump anything left in the common areas onto the curb by Friday noon. Have a wonderful wedding. I disconnected the call, removed the SIM card, snapped it in half, and dropped it into the plastic liner of the trash can. By Thursday afternoon, the narrative the Harris family had constructed for 2 decades began to rot from the head down. I sat in the corner booth of a small diner across from the county justice center, dressed in a sharp charcoal blazer that hid the medical tape around my torso. Opposite me sat Arthur Vance, a 60-year-old litigator who had built his reputation on dismantling commercial fraud and who had taken my case with the predatory enthusiasm of a wolf spotting an unguarded sheepfold. The district attorney has upgraded the charges against Thomas Harris to aggravated battery and intimidation of a complaining witness, Vance said, tapping a red manila folder with his gold Montblanc pen. The hospital's hallway camera caught the entire sequence. Your mother holding your hair, your father landing 3 closed fist blows while you were on the floor, and your brother deliberately crushing your telecommunications device to prevent emergency dispatch. And the $10,000? I asked. Vance smiled, a cold, razor-thin expression. The magistrate reviewed the bank timestamp. He sent the transfer 6 minutes after the police were dispatched, with a memo that explicitly conditioned the payment on non-cooperation with law enforcement. It's a textbook Class 3 felony. The judge set his bail at $250,000. Cash only. No 10% bond provision. Can Eleanor make bail? Not unless she liquidates the family equity line, Vance replied, taking a slow sip of black coffee. Which brings us to the interesting part of our financial audit. Did you know that your parents took out a second mortgage on the Elmwood property 3 years ago to finance Henry's private tuition and Talia's influencer branding agency? I knew they were short on cash, I said. My father told me the market had softened. The market didn't soften. Your father was embezzling from his own partnership. Draw, Vance said. And the guarantor on that second mortgage? The co-signer, whose signature appears on the deed of trust? He slid a document across the table. I looked at the bottom of the page. There, in shaky imitation script, was my name, Nora Harris. I was in Singapore for the supply chain conference on that date, I said, my voice dropping an octave. I have the passport stamps and the corporate boarding passes to prove it. Then we have forgery, bank fraud, and identity theft exceeding $100,000, Vance said calmly. I've already notified the bank's fraud division. By tomorrow morning, the freeze on the Elmwood property will be absolute. Your mother won't be able to withdraw $50 for groceries, let alone 250 grand to get your father out of county lockup. I looked out the diner window. The autumn wind was stripping the maple trees bare, sending dry leaves skittering across the asphalt. What about the hospital? I asked. Henry's status? Vance's expression softened slightly, though his professional detachment remained intact. The Oncology Ethics Board held an emergency session this morning. They confirmed what you told me. Talia Harris is a verified, fully compatible match. The chief of medicine formally approached her at 10 o'clock today to request an immediate, expedited harvest. And what did our saintly Talia say? Vance pulled a second sheet from his folder. She produced a handwritten note from an esthetician claiming she had received a dermal injection that contraindicated surgical anesthesia, followed by a formal letter from an attorney stating that any attempt to coerce her into donation would result in a multi-million-dollar civil rights suit against the hospital network. I let out a dry, cracked laugh that pulled sharply at my stitches.
She
refused. Categorically, Vance said. According to the nurse's log, Henry threw a bedside urinal at her head. The hospital security had to physically escort Talia off the premises. When she left, she was screaming that she wasn't going to ruin her health for a boy who is already half dead. And my mother? Eleanor was caught in the middle, Vance noted. She tried to defend Talia, so Henry turned on her. He told his own mother that if he died, he was leaving a recorded video stating that Eleanor and Thomas murdered him by driving away the only person who is actually keeping him alive. I closed my eyes for 3 seconds. In the darkness behind my eyelids, I didn't see the hospital or the courtrooms. I saw the balcony in July 7 years ago.
I
Saw Daisy's panting, dry tongue. I saw my mother packing our beach towels into the trunk of the SUV while I screamed through the glass, begging for a single bowl of water. You have always been such a disappointment, Nora. Push the filings forward, Arthur, I said, opening my eyes. Every single one of them. Do not offer a plea deal. Do not accept a settlement. I want the criminal charges, the civil fraud complaints, and the lease evictions served simultaneously. It will leave them completely destitute, Vance warned, though there was no pity in his voice, only the cold calculation of a man who enjoyed his work. Your father will lose his license to practice commercial brokerage. Your brother will be at the mercy of the public donor registry, which has an average wait time of 9 months for his phenotype, and your cousin will be named in a public fraud indictment before the week is out. They had 26 years to show me a single drop of mercy, I said, rising from the booth and adjusting my coat over my bruised ribs. I'd hate to insult them now by offering something they clearly have no use for. The eviction of apartment 4B became the neighborhood spectacle of the season. On Friday morning, 2 deputy sheriffs stood by the curb of Crescent Street, while a 3-man crew from a private moving company emptied the 5th floor unit. Talia was on the sidewalk, dressed in an oversized cashmere sweater and designer sunglasses, shrieking into her phone while Julian paced the perimeter like a caged animal. Boxes of imported Italian porcelain, racks of bespoke bridesmaid dresses, and velvet-lined jewelry cases were stacked indiscriminately on the wet pavement. You can't do this, Talia screamed at the lead deputy, her manicured finger jabbing toward his badge. I live here. This is an illegal lockout. My fiancé is an attorney. Your fiancé is a junior associate at an insurance defense firm, Miss Harris. A voice called out from the steps. I walked down the brownstone stairs, holding a clipboard with a certified sheriff's writ. When Julian saw me, his face drained of color. He looked from my swollen, stitched face to the pile of luxury goods sitting on the curb, then back again. Nora, he stammered, stepping toward me. Look, let's talk about this. The wedding is in 48 hours. The caterers are already delivering the perishables to the venue. If you cancel the credit authorizations now, the deposit on the hall will bounce, and the deposit already bounced, Julian, I said, stepping past him as if he were a piece of discarded cardboard. I pulled the authorization on Tuesday night. The venue manager called me yesterday. He's already rebooked the space for a corporate retirement banquet. Talia lunged toward me, her designer sunglasses slipping down her nose, revealing the puffy, bloodshot eyes beneath. The delicate, ethereal beauty she had cultivated for years had dissolved into a mask of pure, feral rage. You ruin everything, she shrieked, her voice cracking into a shrill register. that made the moving crew pause.
You've always been jealous of me.
Because Uncle Thomas loved me more. Because Julian chose me. Because you're an ugly, miserable cow who has to buy people's affection. Talia, shut up. Julian hissed, grabbing her arm. Stop talking. No. Look at her. Talia pointed at me, her hands trembling.
She's doing this.
Because Henry loves me. Because everyone loves me. Henry tried to strangle you with your own scarf yesterday morning, Talia. I said, my voice quiet, flat, and carrying clearly through the crisp autumn air. The hospital security report is public record now. He knows you refused to donate. He knows you let him rot, so you wouldn't have needle marks on your hip. For your wedding night. Julian froze. He turned his head slowly, looking at Talia with an expression of sudden, sickening clarity. You told me the doctors disqualified you, Julian whispered. You told me the oncology board said your heart couldn't handle the harvest protocol. Julian, she's lying, Talia pleaded, grabbing the lapels of his coat.
She's
trying to tear us apart. She forged those records. The National Registry doesn't forge HLA tissue typings, Julian, I said, tossing a manila envelope onto the top of a box containing her wedding favors, the delicate little boxes of silver-wrapped almonds she had brought to the hospital like a trophy. That's the certified record from the regional lab. She's a 10 out of 10 match. She could have saved Henry with a 3-hour peripheral blood stem cell harvest.
No general anestesiche.
No major surgery. Just in 4 line and 4 days of mild joint aches. Julian looked down at the envelope. He didn't open it. He didn't need to. He knew the truth the moment he looked at Talia's terrified, guilty face. You let his family fall apart, Julian whispered, stepping backward away from her grasping hands. You let her father go to jail. You let Henry deteriorate. You told me she was trying to kill him. Julian, we're getting married on Saturday. Talia cried, tears finally streaming down her face, real tears this time, born not of performance, but of catastrophic loss. The invitations are out. My dress is inside that box. The dress was paid for with my stolen identity, I said coldly.
And the
sheriff is impounding that box as part of the asset forfeiture for the bank fraud warrant. The lead deputy stepped between Talia and the boxes, his hand resting on his utility belt. Ma'am, step back from the property. Everything on this curb is subject to court-ordered attachment. Julian looked at Talia for 5 long seconds. Then, without a word, he turned on his heel, walked to a sedan parked across the street, got in and drove away. He didn't look back in the rearview mirror. Talia fell to her knees on the damp sidewalk, surrounded by the remnants of the life I had financed for her, screaming my name into the empty street. I didn't stop to watch. I walked down the block, flagged a cab, and gave the driver the address of the county lockup. The visitation booth at the county detention center was separated by 2 inches of scratch-resistant plexiglass. When my father was brought in, he looked 20 years older. The jail issue orange jumpsuit hung loosely over his frame. His silver hair, usually immaculately coiffed, was matted and greasy. The arrogance that had sustained him for a lifetime had curdled into a dark, desperate fury. He slammed the plastic receiver against his ear before he even sat down. You think you're clever, don't you? He hissed through the perforated metal
grill.
You think you can destroy this family and walk away? I built you, Nora. Everything you are, every cent you make, came from the discipline I gave you. I picked up my receiver slowly, leaning forward so he could see every single stitch in my face, every dark purple bruise that had turned the color of stagnant water. You didn't build me, Thomas, I said. You starved me. You beat me. You taught me how to survive on rainwater and dog food while you took your golden children to Disney World.
His face twitched.
That was for your own good. You were an insolent, ungrateful brat who needed to learn her place. My place, I repeated. And what is your place now? The DA filed 9 counts this morning. Grand larceny, identity theft, bank fraud, felony assault, witness tampering. The bank has already initiated foreclosure proceedings on Elmwood
Terrace.
By next month, Mother will be living in a state-subsidized motel on Highway 9. You can drop the charges. Thomas slammed his cuffed hands against the glass, making the pain shudder. A corrections officer stepped forward, resting a hand on his baton, but I raised 2 fingers to signal I was fine. Sign the withdrawal affidavit. Tell the prosecutor it was a domestic misunderstanding.
If
you do that, I can still salvage the firm's equity. I can save Henry. Henry is on the public Medicaid registry now, I said calmly. The private insurance policy lapsed yesterday because the premium bounced.
He's being
Transferred to the County General Hospital's palliative care ward this afternoon. Thomas's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The realization hit him like a physical blow, not the loss of his son, but the total, absolute loss of his
control.
You're a monster, he whispered, tears of rage finally leaking into his gray
Stubble.
A cold, vicious monster. No, I said, leaning closer until my breath fogged the glass between us. I was a daughter who loved you so much she let you bleed her dry for 26 years. But you made a mistake, Thomas. You forgot that when you drain someone completely, there's nothing left to lose. And a person with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous thing in the world. I took a folded legal document from my coat pocket and pressed it against the
Glass.
It was the final decree of adult severance and name change, filed under emergency seal with the county probate court. As of 9 o'clock this morning, Nora Harris no longer exists, I said.
My
name is Nora Vance. I took Arthur's family name, a man who has shown me more protection in 72 hours than you showed me in a lifetime. You can't erase your blood, Thomas shouted, his voice cracking against the
glass.
You carry my DNA. You belong to this family. I am giving you back your DNA, I said. I picked up the small manila envelope I had brought with me. Inside were the torn pieces of the bone marrow donation form, the shredded airline tickets to Sweden, and the single brass key to the Elmwood house. I dropped them into the evidence intake slot beneath the partition. Give those to Henry, I whispered. Tell him to see if they can filter his blood. I hung up the receiver. Behind the glass, Thomas was screaming, pounding his fists against the partition, until the guards tackled him to the concrete floor, his orange jumpsuit twisting. As they forced his arms behind his back, I turned around and walked down the long, gray corridor, through the heavy, magnetic security doors, and out into the autumn sunshine. 6 months later, spring arrived in upstate New York with an unhurried, gentle
thaw.
I had bought a small, 2-story craftsman house 20 miles outside the city, situated on 3 acres of overgrown meadow and old birch trees. It had cost less than half of what my father had stolen from my credit lines, money that Arthur Vance had aggressively recovered through the civil attachment of my parents' liquidated retirement accounts. The house needed work. The porch railings were weathered, and the roof had a slow leak near the chimney, but every square inch of the cedar siding belonged
to me.
No one held a key. No one had a proxy. On a Tuesday afternoon, while I was kneeling in the damp earth planting wild lavender along the stone walkway, my phone rang. It was Arthur Vance. Nora, he said, his tone carrying the quiet gravity of a final ledger entry. The court proceedings for your father concluded an hour ago. I sat back on my heels, wiping a smudge of dark loam from my wrist. What was the sentence? 11 years at Coxsackie Correctional Facility on the combined fraud and assault counts. No eligibility for parole until year 7, Arthur said.
Your
mother took a plea deal, 3 years of supervised probation, and 500 hours of community service. She's currently living in an assisted living annex in Syracuse, working the laundry shift at the municipal hospital. And Talia? The state board revoked her professional licenses, following the perjury convictions. She's working as a receptionist at a used auto dealership in Scranton. Julian broke the engagement permanently. I understand he sued her family to recover the wedding deposits and won a default judgment of $18,000. I looked out across the meadow. The birch trees were budding with pale green shoots, catching the thin, clear light of early April. And Henry? I asked quietly. There was a brief pause on the line. He passed away last night at St. Jude's, Arthur said. The county ward couldn't find a matching cord blood unit in time after the graft failure. Eleanor was there, but he refused to let her into the room at the end. The attending nurse told me he spent his last 3 hours asking for you. I held the phone to my ear, listening to the soft rustle of the wind through the dead grass. I waited for the wave of grief to hit me. I waited for the crushing guilt that my mother had spent 20 years programming into my nervous system, the instinct to fall to my knees, to tear at my clothes, to believe that Henry's death was a murder I had committed by choosing to survive. It didn't come. All I felt was a vast, clean stillness, a silence like the moment after a violent storm finally runs out of rain, leaving the air sharp, cold, and clear. Thank you for telling me, Arthur, I said. Are you going to attend the service? He asked. Eleanor put a notice in the
Paper.
It's tomorrow at the county cemetery. No, I said softly. I buried my family 7 years ago. The people dying now are just strangers. I hung up the phone and slipped it into my apron pocket. From the back of the meadow, a sharp, joyful bark echoed across the grass. A golden-furred retriever mix, a rescue from the county shelter whose ribs had once been as visible as mine, came bounding through the dandelions afraid. Tennis ball clamped proudly between her jaws. Her tail was an ecstatic blur, her dark eyes bright with the uncomplicated, unearned joy of a creature that knew it was safe. Come here, Barnaby, I called, holding out my hands. She skidded to a halt in front of me, dropping the wet ball into the dirt and pressing her broad, warm forehead firmly against my knees, letting out a long,
Contented sigh.
I buried my fingers in her thick fur, feeling the steady, rhythmic beat of her heart against my palms. The clouds above the tree line broke, and the first warm rain of the season began to fall, soft, quiet, and clean, washing the last traces of winter into the dark earth below.